Have you ever just stopped and wondered why a tiny mouse lives for maybe a couple of years, but some whales can cruise around for 2 centuries? Seriously, it's one of the biggest puzzles in biology. It really seems like every single species has its own internal clock, and they're all ticking at wildly different speeds. So what's setting the alarm on that clock? Well, it turns out the answer might not have to do with how fast our hearts beat, but with a quiet, steady counter hidden deep, deep inside our DNA.
I mean, just look at this. You've got the mouse, right? Its life is this frantic 2-year sprint. And then over here you have the giraffe, which gets a pretty leisurely quarter century. They're both mammals, but, biologically speaking, their experience of time is on completely different planets. The difference is it's staggering.
And this all leads us to the big question, right? What in the world is this biological clock? Is there some kind of universal counter ticking away that decides why one species gets just a few years, while another one gets decades and decades? The answer, as it turns out, might be way simpler and more universal than we ever thought. Okay, so to find our first clue, we need to zoom way, way in. I'm talking past the organs, past the tissues, all the way down to our individual cells. Because the prime suspect in this whole mystery isn't some big, complex system. Nope, it's the tiny, unavoidable errors that creep into our genetic code over our lifetimes. Now, the official term for these things is a somatic mutation. Let's just break that down really quick. Somatic just means it's happening in your body cells. Think skin, liver, that kind of thing, and not the reproductive cells you'd pass on to kids. And a mutation is just a change in your DNA. So really, these are just changes that happen to you during your life. The best way to think about this is to imagine your genome is this enormous instruction manual for how to build and run your body. Every single time a cell divides, it has to copy that entire massive manual. And, just like if you photocopied a book thousands and thousands of times, tiny little mistakes, these typos, they're going to start showing up. It's inevitable. So how do these little typos spread? Well, it all starts with just one mistake in one single cell. But then, when that cell divides, both of its new daughter cells get a copy of that same typo. Now imagine this process repeating over and over, for years and years. Eventually, you end up with whole populations of cells that are all carrying their own unique collection of these genetic mistakes. Okay, so we've got a theory. Maybe these typos piling up have something to do with aging. But how on earth could you test that? Well, a team of researchers decided to find out. They undertook this incredible investigation, basically a journey across the whole animal kingdom, to see if they could find a pattern. And let me tell you, the scale of this study was just massive. This was no small operation. They looked at 16 different kinds of mammals. We're talking everything from mice to humans to lions to giraffes. They sequenced the entire genomes from the intestinal cells of 56 different animals. This was a huge, huge undertaking, all designed to find one clear signal in all that genetic noise. And of course, once they started crunching all that data, something pretty amazing started to emerge. They found a pattern that was, at the same time, completely logical and yet totally shocking. First, here's the part that kind of makes sense. They found that the rate of these DNA typos, so the number of new mistakes that happened each year, was wildly different from species to species. A short-lived animal like a mouse racks up mutations at a blistering pace. Meanwhile, a long-lived giraffe has a much, much slower rate of mutation. So far, so good. That tracks, right? And that's the first big takeaway. This really strong inverse relationship. The faster the mutation rate, the shorter the lifespan. The slower the rate, the longer the lifespan. It was a super clear correlation, actually one of the strongest they found. But believe it or not, that wasn't even the most surprising part.
Okay, this is where things get really wild. On one hand, you have these absolutely massive differences between the animals, right? A 30-fold difference in how long they live, an incredible 40,000-fold difference in how big they are. But on the other hand, the total number of mutations an animal had collected by the end of its life was almost the same for every single one of them. It only varied by a factor of about 3. A mouse, a human, a giraffe, they all seem to die with roughly the same number of genetic typos in their cells. Just think about that for a second.
I mean, that is a profound idea. What does it even mean that all these different mammals, with all their diversity, seem to share a similar mutation limit? It really suggests that we might have just stumbled upon a fundamental constraint on life itself.
a kind of evolutionary clock. And that's exactly what the researchers who did the study concluded. This quote from their paper says it all. The rate at which these mutations happen, it's not random. It seems to be tightly controlled by evolution. And this rate, this ticking clock of typos, it might be a direct cause, or at the very least, a major contributor to the entire process of aging. Which of course brings us to one last really provocative thought. If a mouse lives its life really fast and hits its mutation limit in 2 years, and a human lives slow and steady and hits that same limit in 80 years, what does that actually mean for us? Have we reached our limit? Or could we, by understanding this clock, maybe find a way to slow its ticking down even more? It seems like the lifespan lottery might have a set number of tickets, but maybe, just maybe, science is finally starting to figure out how they're counted.